The Fox 5 drone flying high above the site where developers plan to build a high-speed rail station. Brightline aims to connect Las Vegas to Rancho Cucamonga, California. It's a plan that's been talked about for years by different companies, a plan that would hopefully solve traffic congestion between Las Vegas and Southern California. Fox 5's Mike Allen tells us what this new development is and whether or not this one will actually happen. Mike?
Yeah, there certainly have been plenty of attempts to get this high-speed rail going. This one might be a little different. One of the reasons, the amount of money that's being asked for. I'm standing across the 15 right now from where the eastern terminus would be, near Blue Diamond in Warm Springs. Recently, a bipartisan group of lawmakers from Nevada and California penned a letter to Pete Buttigieg, the U.S. Transportation Secretary, asking for a whole lot of money to fund this project. We got some renderings to show you. Let's pop them up.
The latest attempt at a high-speed rail line connecting the Vegas Valley to Southern California aims to cut the travel time between the two places in half. If successful, this would be the first to get through in a long line of failed attempts. After the Desert Wind train stopped running back in 1997, there have been tries to get projects going from Vegas to Anaheim, Victorville, and Palmdale, with tens of millions of dollars in funds that wound up getting withdrawn along the way. One of those projects was actually backed by Brightline, and this newest attempt by the company would go to Rancho Cucamonga. Brightline estimates a cost of about $10 billion. The company is asking for about a third of that cost to be covered by the feds. Lawmakers from Nevada and California who were in support of this project say Brightline projects about 35,000 construction jobs to come from this project, along with 1,000 permanent jobs. Brightline CEO Mike Reininger says Brightline West will be the first true high-speed rail system in America and will serve as the blueprint for how we can connect major city pairs that are too short to fly and too far to drive. The company says this rail line should cut down on the 50 million trips made each year between Vegas and Southern California.
Now that $3.75 billion that would come from the federal government, it actually would come from a pool that's already set aside for rail projects like this. There's $102 billion set aside thanks to the bipartisan infrastructure law that was passed a couple years ago. This would be about 3.5% of that total. Reporting live from I-15 and Blue Diamond, Mike Allen, Fox 5 News, local Las Vegas.
And Brightline has been operating a high-speed line in Florida for the past decade, and despite several crashes with vehicles at rail crossings, the company has not been found to be at fault in any of them.